Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Math 100. We are going to study section 5.2 in this video. All right, 5.2 is about the types of statistical studies. All right, as I have mentioned before, statistics basically used all over in pretty much every discipline. So regardless of your major, you probably will have to study statistics or some elements of statistics. All right, statistics used extensively in sports. Right, so in the sports world, people make decisions based on statistics and data all the time. All right, so here's my background, the Dodger Stadium, and so let's look into the types of statistical study. Well, types of statistical studies in chapter 5 and section 2 today. Okay, section 5.2. The topic or the title is types of statistical studies. All right, so what kind of statistical studies are there? And the reason this is important is because depending on what type of statistical studies was done, right, you can make conclusions. Sometimes you cannot make certain conclusions. All right, so it is important for you to know what type of study was done and what types of study must be done in order to make certain conclusions. For instance, if you are developing vaccination or new vaccine for a new found virus or something, you have to do a certain type of statistical study. Otherwise, your conclusion would be meaningless. All right, so this is again something that's pretty important. And in some contexts, it really is a matter of life and death. So let's look at these. The main question here is what type of statistical studies are there? Another question, is one better than another? Another question would be, when do you use a particular type of statistical studies, right? So here are the types. Number one, observational. Observational studies. What are observational studies? That's exactly that, observational, right? So researchers observe, simply observe and measure and collect data. There is no influence given to anyone or any group, right? So this is the key here. Maybe I should underline this. The key here is that the researchers are not doing anything to the subjects being studied. All right, so if you take everybody's height, okay, you are not actually influencing them, right? You're not giving your subjects anything to promote or enhance their growth, and you're simply taking measurements and collecting data. That would be an observational study. If you influence or if you give some kind of a treatment to your subjects, and you compare two groups of people or your subjects, that is called experiments. And an experiment is a type of statistical study. An experiment is a statistical study in which the group, your sample, is divided up into at least two groups. Okay, one is called a treatment group. So this is a group of people or subjects to which something is given a treatment, right? And then you have to compare what happens to this treatment group with a group that doesn't get a treatment, and that group is called a control group. Right, so a control group is not going to be getting the same treatment. So you have a treatment group and a control group to study the effectiveness of a treatment. It could be a new drug, it could be an exercise, it could be some kind of a habit, something that people do, right? And so the important thing here is in experiments, you have at least two groups, okay, a treatment group and a control group, and the treatment group gets some sort of a treatment. That's the difference between observational and experiments. All right, so that is the difference. All right, now for the control group, do they get nothing? Well, sometimes they get nothing, but sometimes in order to prevent a certain psychological effect, we give them what is known as a placebo. Now, this is a word that we hear a lot in news, especially during events like a pandemic or epidemic. right? Because when you develop a new vaccine, you have to give what is called a placebo. Sometimes a placebo is just called a fake pill, or sometimes it is a fake pill. All right. So on this side here, I'm going to make a little note on placebo effect. Do you know what a placebo effect is? It's a psychological effect that improves a condition such as illness or some sort of ailment, just because the patient believes a or any treatment is given. Sometimes because the person thinks, oh yeah, I should be getting better because I am getting treated with this new medication, that makes the person actually better. It's a strange phenomenon, right? But I mean, humans are mental, psychological beings, and so sometimes a fake pill can make us better because we think that fake pill is a real pill, and when that happens, that is called a placebo effect. Okay, now we don't want that happening when we do conduct an experiment on a new treatment, such as a new vaccine. All right, so clearly participants should not know, right, which ones are getting a placebo and which ones are getting the real treatment. And the fact that you are giving a placebo should not be revealed to the people who are getting a placebo, because that would kill the whole purpose of using the placebo. Right? Yeah, I'm getting a placebo. I know I'm not supposed to be getting better. That's not what you want to happen. So when the patients do not know, the participants do not know who belongs to which group, this is called a single blind studies. Okay, so in a single blind study, participants do not know which, if they are in a treatment group or if they are in the control group. But sometimes a more careful study needs to be done. All right. So, what happens is you give the new medicine to a group of people, the treatment group, and then you give a fake medicine, a placebo. Many times it's a sugar pill or a water pill or saline solution as opposed to real IV or something, and you compare. And of course, the participants don't know. But then eventually somebody has to assess or analyze and get information from the patients, right? Those are usually doctors or whoever is assessing the patients. If the assessors, if the doctors know which ones belong to the treatment group and which ones are getting placebos, sometimes the doctors, the ones who are assessing the conditions, may get biased opinions. And in order to avoid that, okay, sometimes we make sure that the doctors themselves don't even know which ones belong to the control group and which ones are in the treatment group. If that's the case, we call that kind of a careful study a double-blind study. So in a double-blind study, neither the participants nor the evaluators, the doctors, know who belongs to which group. Okay, so an example is a trial on a new antidepressant and so on. Now, why am I using the antidepressant? Here's the reason for it. Okay, because in an antidepressant medication, the doctors have to evaluate the patients, okay? But it is a very subjective evaluation, right? Because, I mean, when you're trying to assess or evaluate the level of depression, for instance, doctors don't have an objective measures to analyze the condition. So in this kind of a trial where the evaluators, their assessment may be affected by knowing who belongs to which group. Okay, so when there is a possibility that the evaluators can be biased by knowing which ones are getting the placebo, in those cases, a double-blind study would be an appropriate type of experiment to conduct. Okay, so sometimes, however, a placebo is impossible. Okay, can you think of a situation or a study in which a placebo is just not possible? This may be laughable, this may be funny, but for instance, let's say you are interested in finding out if jogging would prevent sickness. Is jogging good for you? I think it is, okay, but let's say you want to have a scientific statistical study to prove that jogging actually prevents sickness and leads to better health. Okay, so what kind of a placebo can you give? You know, you have a group, a treatment group, and you ask them to jog every day, let's say for half an hour, right? And then the control group gets a fake pill. Can you think of a fake type of jogging? You know, you really can't do that, right? How about this? Does the use of a computer improve children's learning? You know, so you can give 50 students a real computer and you can give 50 students a fake computer. You know, that's really hard to do. So in some situations, a placebo is impossible, and therefore a blind study is impossible. Sometimes it is impossible or even unethical to assign the subject into groups, right? So remember, in all of these experiments, one of the characteristics of an experiment, is that you divide the subject into two groups, okay? And you usually randomly assign them because you can't just have them, you know, join a certain group. I mean, you can say, well, look, I would like to be in a treatment group and I would like to be in the control group. It is the job of the researchers to assign all the subjects into a treatment group and control groups, right? But sometimes that choice or assignment is unethical. Here are some examples. Let's say you want to study, does alcohol affect pregnancies? So what do? Well, you are going to put 50 pregnant women into the group that do not drink alcohol. That may be okay, but then you make sure that the 50 group in the treatment group is going to drink alcohol when they are pregnant. Okay, so you can't make these people drink alcohol when they are pregnant. So that would be unethical. How about this? Do seatbelts save lives? So you're going to make sure that half of your subjects wear seatbelts and the other half not wear seatbelts while they drive. And after a year, you find out how many people die in each group. No, you cannot do that because of ethical reasons. Do drugs kill brain cells? All right, so you give half of people placebo and half of people real drugs and see how many brain cells are dead in each group. Right, so all these cases, you cannot ethically assign people into groups. All right, so this leads us to a third type of statistical study. All right, so we so far had observational studies and experiments. Right, so this third one, sometimes people consider this a part of observational study, but it may be a better thing to assign this as a third type. All right, so this is called a case control study. Okay, so what in the world is a case control study? All right, let me go ahead and write that again. Case control study. I'm listing studies. I am listing this as a third type, right? So you have here, let me go ahead and write this down. I am giving you three types of studies. One is the observational study, and number two is experiment, and number three is case control study. And but some people would put the case control studies under observational studies, and that's okay too. I don't have a problem with it, but I would rather put this as a third type. Okay. Now, what is a case control study? First of all, right? It is a study in which you identify two existing groups. Okay, so instead of you, the researchers, assigning people into groups, they themselves assign themselves into these groups. Okay, so let me give you an example here. Does alcohol affect pregnancies, right? And you cannot make pregnant women drink, but you know that certain pregnant women do drink from their choice, and then many people don't. So these, in your study of pregnancy and alcohol, you study those pregnant women who drink alcohol and the ones who don't. Okay, so these are two existing groups: the one who drinks and the ones who drink and the ones who don't, while they are pregnant. So you can compare those two groups. So in that sense, because there are two groups and you are comparing, they are like experiment, right? But the fact that you are not dividing them into a treatment group and control group, it is like observational because there's no influence given by the researchers, right? The researchers are not giving a treatment to anybody, but the groups are choosing, well, the people are choosing which group to join by themselves. All right. So in that sense, it is like an observational study. And that's why sometimes a case control study is placed under or is considered a type of observational study. But it is also a type of experiment because you are comparing two different groups, right? So a case control study is sort of like a mixture of experiments and observational studies. That's a good way to think about this. And I am putting this as a third and separate category of studies. All right, so in a case control study, subjects identify the two groups and they choose for themselves which group to belong to, right? So this is like an experiment because two or more groups are being compared, right? But it's also like an observational study because researchers are not assigning anyone into groups. Okay. So there. Right. Let me give you some examples here. I've already given you examples like, alcohol and pregnancy, right? Right. So does smoking cause lung cancer? There is quite a bit of writing, written statements about this particular study, smoking. Does it cause lung cancer? See, the problem is you cannot have, you can't really conduct a experiment, okay, making people smoke and making some people not to smoke, right? You can't force people to smoke and see how many of them will end up dead after 10, 20, 30 years. So the best you can do is case control study, a case control study in which you observe people who smoke and the ones who don't, okay? But again, because it is an observational study, technically, you cannot make conclusions. That we will address that more in the second part of this lesson or this section. But this requires a lot more careful study. All right, and there is a history of this very topic. How did researchers actually prove that smoking causes lung cancer? It is a complicated study, and it's one of the big stories in the book called The Data Detective. It is referenced in our textbook, but The Data Detective is actually a very good book if you are interested in statistics, or if you want to know the truth in general. I mean, it is written for the general audience. The Data Detective, a great book that has recently been published. All right, so does smoking cause lung cancer? Smokers versus non-smokers, right? So these people identify themselves as smokers and non-smokers just by their habit. And so you can compare the two groups and study them. Do seat belts save lives? Okay, so some will not wear seat belts, right? I hope you're not one of those people, but some people will not, and some people do. And so you can compare the two naturally divided groups. So these people, you have the seatbelt wearing drivers and non-seatbelt wearing drivers. And so you can compare those groups and their fatality rates. Okay, make sure that those two groups of people are similar in all other ways, except that one wears seatbelt and the other doesn't, right? So for instance, I mean, you don't want to, if one group has a bunch of young people and if the other group has a bunch of old people, or if one group is almost predominantly all men and if the other group is not, okay, then it's really hard to make any conclusions. Okay, but if the two groups are almost identical except that one wears seat belts and the other one doesn't, then you can maybe make a good convincing conclusion. Does alcohol negatively affect pregnancies? I believe the answer is yes, But in order to prove your case, you have to do more than an observational study. But this is it's possible to do a case control study here because some pregnant women will, out of their own will, drink while others don't, right? And so you can compare these two groups, but you can't force them into categories or to certain two groups. Okay, so the second section is, this is about one idea, and this is one of the central ideas of this course. So I really, really want you to get this. And in fact, I'm going to go into the next segment or the next part of this video for this lesson. That's on section 5.2. But the theme and a very, very important idea here is going to be this: an observational study, including the case control studies we talked about. An observational study can never establish cause and effect. Right? So you cannot say based on any observational study that this caused that. Okay, so that is something that's coming up in the second part. So let's go to that second part of this lesson.